Don't you have an actual too
Okay, let me tell you this. I think this is utterly brilliant to have G8BBC once again here and in Askey's flat too. So it's a real pleasure and well done everybody to declare this well and truly open. I have no idea. Is that what it's hang on a minute? No idea.
Tony, this brings me on to the training aspect of it. You have the opportunity. The irony here is that although you're the Director General of the BBC, you're not legally allowed to operate this equipment.
Okay, so
because you're not licensed. But Jim and I, and quite a few other people in this room, actually do have amateur radio licenses, so we can allow you to go on the air and pass what's called a greetings message.
A greetings message, which is this.
But we're hoping that in time, and in fact I'm now going to confer honorary membership of the group on you. You are now member number 36.
Thank you.
36 member. And if you wanted, we would happily train you up to achieve your radio license.
Well, that's a challenge I ought to take on.
And then after your shift in the office on the 4th floor, you can pop up here and get on the air.
But the idea of learning Morse,
you don't have to anymore. Okay, so we have 2 high-frequency transceivers, one of which kindly donated by Kenwood UK, which we will be using now to contact another heritage station, GB2RN, who are on board HMS Belfast.
Oh, right.
Just down in the Port of London. So we're going to call them, and we'd like you basically to declare the station open.
Fantastic.
Open
so when you say you're going to call them, you're going to now say...
What will happen is I will establish contact with them using the procedure that we have to follow legally.
Yeah.
I will then ask you to pass your greetings message. Yeah. When you've finished, if you indicate you've finished, I will then hand transmission back to them and we will hear their response. Hopefully they will acknowledge receipt of your message.
Yeah.
I think
it's a polite response.
The operator at the other end is Jürgen Faxholm, who's ex-Danish Navy telegraphist. GB2RN, Golf Bravo 2, Romeo November. This is Golf 8 Bravo Bravo Charlie calling over.
Yes, this is GB2RN from HMS Belfast responding, over.
GB2RN, Golf 8 Bravo Bravo Charlie. Good morning, old man. Your signal is 5 and 9 plus, 59 plus, over.
Yes, and you are coming through very, very nicely on the ground wave here to HMS Belfast with a 5 and 9, 9 being a very strong signal, over.
GB2RN, Golf 8 Bravo Bravo Charlie. Thank you very much, old man. I'd like to introduce Lord Hall, Tony Hall, who's Director General of the BBC, and he'd like to pass a greetings message, if that's okay with you, over.
Yes, that is fine, and we're very pleased to be involved in the inauguration of the Radio Shack at G8BBC, so we're ready.
Okay, GB2RN, this is G8BBC. Stand by for a greetings message from Tony Hall, Director General.
Hello there, this is a really exciting moment for me. I have to say it's Tony Hall here, the Director General of the BBC, speaking to you from station G8BBC in the new Radio Shack broadcasting house in London, right up here on the 8th floor. It's my huge pleasure to declare the new station officially open and to wish everybody here, the staff of the station, many years of successful operating from this, the original home of broadcasting. Good DX and 73 from Broadcasting House.
Golf Bravo 2 Romeo November. This is G8BBC. Can you QSL that greetings message, please? Over.
Yes, absolutely, and we heard the shout. Thank you very much, Tony, and as I said, it's a great pleasure here. My name is Joe, by the way, and thank you very much for being involved in amateur radio in this way. It's one of the many broadcasts that will take place in the future from BBC House, I suppose. And we are always aware of amateur radio being partly a learning process on electronics engineering, for example, for young people, but also for friendship across the world in all the contacts we have. So thank you very much for being so involved in it, and I hope you will have a lot of success from that radio station, and we will definitely have a lot of conversations with each other. So 73s, and thank you very much. Golf 8 Bravo Bravo Charlie, Golf Bravo 2 Radio November.
Golf Bravo 2 Romeo November, Golf 8 Bravo Bravo Charlie. Many thanks, old man, for your participation in this. And good DX to you, 7-3s from Broadcasting House. This is Golf 8 BBC now signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye and 73.
So 73's best wishes.
Best wishes.
Best wishes. And good DX, may your signal reach distant lands.
Could I ask you to sign the log for me,
Yep.
just in that column there, and we can record this
Just
as a
here.
very historic,
Here.
that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. That was a treat and a half. Thank you
Okay.
very much indeed. Really, really good, and good luck to you all.
And
Yeah.
you have to have a license to...
But
be
you
able to use
just
it.
spoke there. You didn't even think. It just.
I've been doing it an awfully long time. That's the
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
We have various codes and abbreviations that we use to speed up the process, obviously. Those emerged from the days of wireless telegraphy when pounding out your name fully, you know, I'm Jonathan, but on the Morse key, I'm John, obviously. And we have, 7-3s. If you can send 7-3 rather than best wishes, it speeds things up. Yeah. We have Q codes, which are 3-letter Q codes beginning with a Q, that cover all kinds of possibilities.
And where do you reckon the furthest you can get from here will be?
Well, I've worked Brazil from here.
Brazil?
We hope.
One night, yeah.
The problem is with HF, shortwave, is that it's dependent on what the sun is doing, how charged the ionosphere is. At the moment, there's an 11-year sunspot cycle. We're at the bottom of it at the moment.
So is that good
Things
for you
cannot get worse.
Oh, I see. That's bad.
They can't
Okay.
get worse. Having said that, in the last 2 or 3 months, Jim and I have been running test transmissions from here, and we have worked all over Europe. I think Nick, one of our DOMs, has worked into North America as well.
Good.
Things can only get better. So Australia, New Zealand, hopefully
So over
in
the
the next
cycle,
2
so
years,
in
the cycle will now be
3 or
going
4
on
or
an
5
upward
years, you're going to
curve.
get further and
In
further.
6 or 7 years' time, we'll be at the peak again, and we will
And
be
then-
working the world all the time from here.
So exciting.
And we're running the equivalent of a domestic light bulb, 100 watts of power.
Is that right?
Is all we're doing. Running up to a piece of wire on the roof of BH, that's it. That's the magic of wireless. Some people, when I spoke to them about this event, said, "Oh, can't you just do that on Skype?" You can. You can just do that on
It's
Skype.
not as romantic.
But
as having a bit of wine.
that is missing
Yeah.
the magic of wireless.
Yeah, I
And
can
it
see
is a
that. I can
magical
see that.
thing. You know, we're using relatively simple. I mean, the equipment we're using here is really in design not a lot different to what Marconi developed in the 1920s. You know.
And do you just go out on this and, as it were, a bit like on the Hancock thing, you just try to listen to who's out there?
I have to say, Tony Hancock did not do us as a service.
I was wondering whether to
Great.
mention it, and I thought, well, why not? I'm among
Having
friends.
said that, on our
Yeah.
club website, G8BBC.com, the opening page does, our webmaster has put a picture of Tony Hancock.
But you're just finding out, you don't know who you're going to find.
Well,
You
we
just
have
don't-
allocated frequency bands
Yeah.
sort of by international agreement. We're governed by the ITU, a United Nations body, so that's the only reason we kept our
I
frequency
saw that
from people like Vodafone. There's
yeah.
no disrespect to Vodafone, but there's a lot of competition. So we have our allocated frequencies, and there's a certain amount of planning within those, but Jim and I will come up here an evening, switch the microphone on and shout CQ, CQ, which means general call to all stations. So anyone anywhere who can hear me, please respond. We'll exchange signal reports as you heard there, and then we can basically talk about anything. A lot of it is about the weather.
In fact, they're talking to the BBC.
Yeah.
I bet, actually. I really bet.
Yeah.
I bet.
Those
So-
3 letters, BBC.
CQ is what you say.
Yeah, that's general call to all
I'm just
stations. Those 3 letters, though, BBC, have no doubt still have resonance
I
around
can
the
believe
world.
that. I can believe that.
Most people, actually, to date, I have to say, keeps asking me if I'm in Bush House.
Right.
Because internationally, Bush House is still no.
Yeah.
And I'm explaining slowly to people and educating them when we're now in Broadcasting House.
Yeah.
But that's I worked a station in Germany this morning who's ex-Deutsche Welle. He was a Deutsche Welle engineer. So he knew all about the BBC. He said, "Oh, how is Bush House?" I said, "Well, the Bush House is closed. We're in Broadcasting House." So, still around the world, the BBC is still famous.
Even in the Falklands. Even in the Falklands.
Great story.
Yes. Well, Laurie Margolis, who's Laurie here. Laurie's here, of course, will talk to you.
I didn't
Great.
see you.
Which has disappeared into a parallel universe.
Laurie, of course, was in the Langham operating G3OIC.
G3OIC.
Which was the equivalent station in those days, and he, of course, broke the Falklands invasion. He got through to Bob in Port Stanley, who said, "We have some interesting visitors today," and well, the rest is history. It's well documented what Laurie did that day. So, and that was all through the wonders of HF radio, shortwave radio, amateur radio. If we hadn't had that link with the Falklands, we wouldn't have known for some time what had happened. So it has a role to play. So,
But can I just say thank you for inviting me to do this. It's really a delight, I have to say, and I respect what you're doing enormously, and also for honorary members of your group. Well, thank you. I would, no, I mean, it means a lot to me, and I'd love to understand more what you're doing. I would never even see your knacker just coming out of the this will be really, it's kind of romantic in a way. I mean, in a sense of the notion of just seeing who's out there and talking across these amazing spaces as the sun allows us, I think is extraordinary. It's really exciting. So, thank you very much, and good luck with it all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Real pleasure.
Okay. So we're here with Lord Tony Hall from the Director General of the BBC. Your first successful radio contact there as a guest on a ham radio station. How did you enjoy that?
I enjoyed it hugely. I mean, I was so impressed by all the call signs that go out before. I mean, I did the easy bit, which is just saying I'm declaring this open and instead of plain English. Though I learned a couple of things I didn't know. Good DX and 73. I now know what those mean. But I was so impressed, and I really do feel that although that is a kind of a transmission to HMS Belfast, which is just a couple of miles down on the river there, the notion that from here you can link up with whoever's out there, in kind of radio space is very, very exciting and very wonderful. And it's wonderful to know that that is still continuing. And it seems to me not only just continuing but thriving. So to have this at the very top of Broadcasting House is brilliant. I'm very pleased.
And it really does connect back to the history of the BBC as well, with radio and the amateur radio, Marconi and those sort of things as well. It really does cement that relationship with the history of the BBC as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's part of the history of the BBC. I think there are so many very good stories about what's been done using this sort of equipment from the BBC in the past. But also for the future too. I think World Service Radio, World Service TV does a huge amount to contact people around the world and give them the information they need in soft power in that sense. This is another form of that, and I think the contacts which can go on through here, people talk to each other globally. It's so important, indeed more important now than ever before.
Do you feel like it's a great opportunity as well for the staff of the BBC, maybe even yourself, to actually take the couple of weekends out to maybe with the foundation licence and use the wonderful equipment on offer here?
Yeah. Well, I think just to be here and to use this today was absolutely fantastic. I'd love to find time to learn more about it. I really would. But I just admire hugely what's being done, and I wish everybody here the very best.
That's right. Well, congratulations, and hopefully the station's a wonderful success for the organisation.
I really hope so. I'm sure it will be too.
Okay, so we're joined by Jonathan Kempster, M5AO, I believe. And Jonathan, you've been instrumental in getting this today put together and get this new station. Jonathan, perhaps you tell us a little bit about your background and amateur radio.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been a radio listener. That's the thing. For as long as I can remember, I've fallen asleep with an earphone in my ear listening to the radio. And of course, back in my childhood, it was Radio Caroline and Radio Luxembourg. And then at about the age of 8, I became aware of amateur radio. I had a little Russian portable. It had Marine band on it. I tuned across one Sunday morning. There were some radio amateurs speaking in AM mode. One of whom was G3VRY, Jim up in Chesham, very near to where I live. So sent him my little reception report. I got an invitation to visit his shack, and the bug bit. And that was, nearly 50 years ago. Wow. So, following on from that, I got my first proper radio, an FRG7. It's a well-trodden path, this, I think. But I remained a listener, really. Then in 1986, I joined the BBC World Service as a sound trainee, became a studio manager, working on the World Service, height of the Cold War, an awful lot of output on shortwave, and I became very familiar with HF broadcasting, HF transmission systems, how it worked, how it got around the world, and what you needed to do to reach the other side of the world on HF frequencies. All along, I was broadcast band listening, and I was interested in amateur radio, but I never went for the license. Then, back in the 90s, I met my ex-YL, Alison, who works in the BBC as well, and after a few years, she said, "Oh, for goodness sake, why don't you just knuckle down, take the RAE, get your license?" And I said, "Oh, no, I can't, it's too much hard." And she said, no. She bought me the correspondence course, and I even remember on holiday in Kefalonia, in the Greek island, there I was. She made me get the textbook out, do my module that week, and and I took the RAE. That was the old way of getting your license, of course, in those days, and it was actually quite hard. Although I had an engineering background, I had to work on the maths quite a lot. I'm not really very good at physics, and it was a struggle, but I got through it. Applied to take the RAE, which was the City and Guilds exam in those days, and my nearest FE college was Bedford, because I was living in Milton Keynes. Applied, set it up, turned up for the exam that evening, and entered the exam hall, which was a huge gym with hundreds of desks, and there was just me and the invigilator.
Fantastic.
And I thought, so this is where amateur radio has come, just me. Anyway, passed the exam and got I think it was a G1 license, a VHF Class B license. But I've always been shortwave, so it kind of wasn't good enough. But I've also always been terrible at Morse code. I love the idea of Morse code, but I'm terrible.
Similar to me then, Jonathan, yes.
Exactly. But I was living in Milton Keynes, and just down the road is a place called Bletchley Park, which had a very active radio club, the Milton Keynes Amateur Radio Society. So I joined their Morse code evening classes. So every Friday, I'd pound a Morse key for 2 hours, and it slowly seeped in. And after about 4 months, our instructor, who's Dave, whose course I'm afraid I don't recall, said, we're doing tests tomorrow, do you want to have a go? And I think the fact that at 9 o'clock that evening, 10 hours later, I was back at Bletchley Park, I didn't have time to get nervous, and I got through the exam. I only had to achieve 5 words a minute to get what was then called an AB license, which was very short-lived, and that's how the M5 call sign group came up. There's only about 100 of us now because it very quickly died, and they brought in the 3-tiered system with foundation, intermediate, and full. So very shortly after that, I became a full licensee. And that was about 20 years ago. And I have to say, although I think I'm probably a listener at heart still, I still probably listen 90% of the time and I talk 10% of the time. But it's nice to have the privilege of being able to go on the air if you want to. And it means we can do what we're doing here. It's...
So you were telling us earlier, Jonathan, that you had a bit of a health incident a year or so ago, and that's really spurred you to really get involved, and this wouldn't have happened without it, I believe. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, although I'd got the amateur radio license, I was not very active. I was on a very nasty long-term medication that zapped my energy, really, and I didn't have much enthusiasm for life, to be honest with you. I was overweight, I was quite shy and withdrawn. Amateur radio, I was even a little bit scared of going on the air and calling CQ because I didn't quite know who might come back to me. Then I had a heart attack, and I survived the heart attack. I was actually on air doing the Radio 4 6 o'clock news at the time, but I got to the end of the show and then went to hospital. Anyway, the upshot of the whole thing was that I had to come off that long-term medication, and suddenly I lost 3 stone in weight. I stopped sleeping 12 hours a day. I found a tremendous amount of energy. I became fit and enthusiastic for life again. And flicking that switch brought me back to life, but it also brought back the passion I have for radio. It re-energized it. And I thought, I could do a lot more than I'm doing. I've had 20 years of lying on the sofa doing nothing. What can I do? And one thing I was passionate about was this building, Broadcasting House. It's the home of broadcasting. It was the original broadcast centre, the first broadcast centre in the UK. And I thought it should have an amateur radio presence, really. We had this call sign, G8BBC. It was issued in 1972. It's waxed and waned over the years. When Broadcasting House was redeveloped about 10 years ago, we were co-sited over at TV Centre. We had a wonderful TV centre shack on the East Tower, 130 feet above ground, fully equipped. But our membership of the old aerial radio group dropped to 4. Nice. At which point the BBC Club, which organised social activities amongst staff, said, look, I'm sorry, we can't support you anymore, you don't have enough members. You can keep the equipment, it's too much hassle for us to sell, but we're cutting you loose. Then we were told, and by the way, you've got a month to get out, we're selling TV Centre, it's closing down.
Okay, right,
so
okay.
We very, very quickly distributed the remaining equipment amongst aerial radio group branches around the country. We kept the FT920 because I thought maybe one day, and it's been in a wardrobe in my home for the last 4 years. And then G8BBC kind of went into a fallow period. It was me on the 7th floor balcony of BH with my handheld on a Saturday morning after the Today programme on the FM repeaters, and that was really it. We had no members, no organisation, no shack, no equipment, very little on-air presence.
So how did you go about going from that position to where you are today? You've got Lord Hall up in this fantastic facility, you've got a dedicated room here, you've got equipment, you've got donations from Kenwood's, a real success story. How have you gone from that position to where we are today?
Well, it's all happened relatively quickly. When we moved here from TV Centre 4 years ago, I started approaching the BBC facilities departments and saying, look, all we need is a cupboard-sized room near the roof. That's all we want, a desk and 2 chairs. Really, that's all we require. And they kept saying, no, we can't do that, can't do that. And then towards the end of last year, in about September, I spoke to one of our duty operations managers, Clive Bergman, who's now a member of the group. He doesn't have his licence yet, but I'm hopeful. He said, oh, you're talking to the wrong people. When you say amateur radio, they don't understand what you're talking about. You need to talk to Andy Baker. I said, well, who's he? Oh, he's head of engineering here. And I emailed Andy, and literally within 5 minutes I had a reply saying what frequencies, what power, what modes, where do you want your aerials? And by the way, would you like ASCII's flat, which is the room we're in now? It's an iconic room for people who've been in the BBC as long as me, which is 31 years. Remember Arthur Ascii in the 1950s, who used to say, oh, I'm just off to my flat, and he used to pretend he lived in Broadcasting House. And this room, it's just an apparatus room, but it's known as ASCII's flat. Most of the equipment is migrating from here to New Broadcasting House, which is joined onto the building. So it's an empty room, and they said, why don't you have it? Me and Jim said, yes, please. And then things move very quickly from there. As you saw, we now have 36 members, the latest one being the Director General himself. People are enthusiastic, they're keen. There's a lot of people interested in the heritage of this building and this organisation. And I think people see the value of having an amateur presence here. And you know, G8BBC, if Ofcom had revoked that, we'd never have got it back. Yeah. And that would have been a great shame. So I felt compelled I had to act, and I got Jim Lee on board, and he was very keen and helpful, and we formed the London BBC Radio Group, which is a totally independent group. We wanted independence. We don't want to be linked to the BBC Club, big and useful though they are. We don't want to be in the pocket of the BBC, and we want to be able to decide things for ourselves. And there's obviously a membership criteria. You've got to have some kind of link with the BBC. So we have staff, we have freelancers, and we have retired staff. We have some honorary members, and that's how it's proceeded. And as you see, we're now pretty strong. We're stronger than the old aerial radio group ever was. And the license is now secure, G8BBC. And I think we're going to go from strength to strength. My hope is that we can introduce some sort of training program, because at the moment, only about a third of our membership is actually licensed. And my aim of this whole venture was to activate the call sign, get it out there on the air, get people working us. And for the last couple of months, we've been running the test transmissions from the building to reassure the engineering department here that we're not going to interfere with their systems. And Paul McGrath, the chief engineer of the master control room, was here at the event today, and he said, don't worry, we've seen nothing on our scope in the last 3 months.
That's good news. That's fantastic news.
So no QRM problems, and he's allowed us 100 watts on HF, up to 50 watts on 2 meters for now. 70 centimeters, it's not clear, because there are some broadcast systems on 442, which are a little bit close for comfort. But given time, we are called radio amateurs, but as you can imagine, most of the members in this building are broadcast professionals. We do know what we're doing, and we know how to operate a station cleanly and not interfere. So I have great hopes. I mean, we're not going to be doing moon bounce from the roof, believe me. But we're running data modes already. Nick Garrett, one of our members, who's a duty manager here, has set up the data mode station, and he's had great success with FT8. He's been getting into South America in the middle of the night using milliwatts, So we can do a lot from here. And I think the sky's the limit. We've got a great space. We've got an awful lot of support, even, from as high as the DG.
Well, how difficult was it to get him today to come along and cut the ribbon, so to speak?
I have to confess, it wasn't difficult at all. I grabbed him when he was vulnerable. His office is on the 4th floor. My locker's on the 4th floor. He was coming out of the gents' toilet. I thought he's vulnerable. So I approached him and said, Tony, would you cut the ribbon, basically? He said, of course I would. And since then, his office have really, really worked hard to make this happen, and they've been so supportive, and we're very, very grateful. And as you see, he's even now a member of the group. So I think people are enthused by it, from the heritage, the history. I mean, you probably talked to Laurie Margolis, you know about the whole Falklands thing. You know, there's been amateur radios as long as radio amateurs here, as long as there's been a BBC. You know, the amateur radio operation in the Langham started in the 1940s. You know, it's important we have an amateur radio presence here. It's the home of broadcasting. And I think we've got a really rosy, secure future now. You know, this building is not going to disappear. This room is not going to disappear. We've got support from the BBC, from the engineering here. We've got support from Kenwood. We've got members coming in. And when we use those letters on the air, BBC, people are enthused. They want to get into our logbook. And now we've got an opportunity to move from strength to strength. You know, today was kind of day one of a new era for us. People know about us. They're going to want to work us. And I'm keen to just press ahead, get the station on the air as much as possible.
Jonathan, that's a fantastic story. You've got a wonderful station here. Wish you all the success and best of wishes for the future.
Well, it's great ICQ could come along. We're really grateful for your support.
Oh, we're glad to be here. Absolutely. It's been great fun.
Okay, we'll update you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Well, we're here with Mark from Kenwood. Mark, Kenwood have been kindly associated with the G8BBC station here and kindly offered a TS 590 to help make the contact day to HMS Belfast.
Yes, well, we've actually donated this radio for the G8BBC club station. We're delighted to be involved. I mean, BBC has a huge heritage and involvement with radio and amateur radio, and in fact, it was amateur radio operators that were involved in its when it was originally established. So there is a big history which I am personally and the company Kenwood are very keen to support. So I'm good friends with Jim Lee, who is the together with Jonathan. They've come together and built this station back up again, and we're truly honoured to be a part of it. So yes, we will support it for as long as the club is here.
Exactly, and it'd be great to see as well more BBC employees actually get involved in amateur radio, considering how obviously crucial it is to the organisation. It'd be great to see the club swelling as well over numbers over the coming years, wouldn't it?
There are a remarkable number of amateur radio enthusiasts who are employees of the BBC, and I think this is only going to help grow that. And I believe there's quite a healthy number of club members already, so let's hope that it does increase the numbers.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, we're joined by Laurie Margolis. Hi, Laurie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
I think you've got an interesting story about the BBC and the Falklands conflicts and an amateur radio league.
Yeah, this goes back to 1982 and was from over the road from where we are. We're here in New Broadcasting House where this new station has just been established. There used to be over the road in the Langham building, before it became the Langham Hotel, it was a BBC office block. And there was an amateur station up in the eaves there, G3AYC. It was a good station, had a beam up at about 200 feet above the street. And I used to go up there and use it occasionally. And when the Falklands conflict started, I was asked if we could get in touch with the Falklands because nobody knew what was going on. We knew that something had happened there, but nobody knew what. So 2nd of April 1982, I went up there and listened around for some hours and eventually heard a station who I thought this is definitely from the Falklands from his accent and what he was saying. Subsequently realised it was VP8LP, Bob McLeod, who is still very much around. And I called him, said I was at the BBC in London. We had spoken before. And he said, Laurie, why is the BBC saying there's been no invasion? There's an Argentinian warship in the bay, Argentinian troops all over town. The broadcast station is broadcasting in Spanish and the governor is under house arrest. I said, right, well, we weren't exactly sure of that, but I guess we are now. And I went on the Radio 4 PM programme a short time afterwards with this information. Which caused a bit of a sensation because it was the first confirmation that something had gone terribly wrong. The story obviously ran bigger and bigger. I was later called in by my editor that evening in an office here in Broadcasting House to have a press conference. And for many years was hoping, obviously the story was by and large right, but was hoping that it was entirely right. I was rung by the Foreign Office, who said, understand you've been talking to the Falklands, what are they saying? So I told them what they were saying. Argentinian warship, Argentine troops all over town, governor under arrest. Not long afterwards, Lord Carrington, who was then Foreign Secretary, stood up in the House of Lords and announced that the invasion had happened. And it was only about 5 years ago, 30 years after the event in 2012, when the 30-year papers came out from the government, that there was one confirming my information and confirming that I was the sole source of that information, and also that it was correct as well. So 30 years later, it was nice to have all that confirmed.
What a fantastic story! What a great! It really shows amateur radio in, really making history, and absolutely, essential to news and to the government. A really great story. So, Laurie, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Pleasure. Nice talking to you.
So it's Steve Hartley, Golf Zero Foxtrot Uniform Whiskey, the RSGB president. All right, president, chairman.
No, I'm not even the chairman anymore.
Oh, you're not now?
I'm just a board director.
Just a board director now. Just a board director, So it's obviously great to have the BBC as an organisation now, becoming more interested in amateur radio and bringing G8BBC online. What's the importance of not only the BBC as an organisation, but large organisations like this becoming more active in amateur radio?
Well, I think it gives some recognition to the amateur radio service in a big way, and it can bring lots of publicity to bring the hobby to the attention of the public, and bring in lots of new people. And the association with the BBC is obviously a prestigious thing to have, and I'm quite jealous of the call sign. I think to break through pile-up, something like that is going to be an absolute must. But no, I think if other organisations could do likewise, it would do lots for the hobby and make us more prominent in the public eye.
Exactly, and I know the guys here are very hopeful of getting lots of staff members trained up and getting their foundation levels and then moving them through the ranks, etc. So obviously it'll be a great input of technical expertise into our hobby, coming from obviously their broadcasting background.
Absolutely, and I think that the beauty of the foundation, of course, is that anybody can come in from any level, and it may not just be the technical BBC staff, but the broadcasting people as well who can come and appreciate. And the DG was obviously excited by the experience, and you never know, maybe we get somebody like that as a role model for the rest of them.
Exactly, we'll have to reserve a special call sign for him just in case he does get his licence. Make sure he gets a good licence call sign.
Yes, I'm sure something like G5DG's around, but it may well be taken. But no, I think the more people we can get as role models to show the hobby off, and to see how the benefits of the hobby, that it's still relevant in the 21st century. I think it's got to be good.
Agree entirely. Thanks for your time, Steve. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Okay, we're joined by Jim Lee, G4AH. Jim works here at the BBC and the radio. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Chris.
So, obviously you're involved very much. I believe you're the chairman of the club here at Broadcasting House. Do you know a little bit about the history, perhaps, of amateur radio at the BBC? Can you perhaps give us a little bit of background, or is that something you can talk about?
Well, there's not only G8BBC, there's G2BBC, there's a G3BBC, there's a G7 BBC that I know of, and then there are other non-BBC suffixes around, suffixes, or whatever the word is. And these were in various buildings, BBC buildings around the country. There was one down at Bush House, where the World Service used to operate from at one time. Across the road from Broadcasting House is the Langham Hotel now. Well, that used to be a BBC building. That had G3AYC in it, and you've probably spoken to Laurie, and he's told you the story about that. When I worked at Pebble Mill in Birmingham, I operated G2 BBC from there. And I think the interesting story about G2 BBC is that, because these G2 prefixes were issued, was it just before or just after the war? G2 BBC was never issued, presumably because the equivalent of Ofcom back then thought the BBC might want it. So that wasn't actually issued, I understand, from the person who holds the call now, until the 1980s. Okay. And then it was used. So it's not as old as it
quite sounds. So it sounds like there's a real connection between the BBC and amateur radio. There's always clubs around the country, different buildings. What might that be? Is it the skills that you get from amateur radio that transfer across to your job?
I think so. Well, I mean, I started listening to the pirate radio stations in the 1960s. That sparked my interest in radio. because I was so interested in the radio, I was kind of the family couldn't listen to the home transistor radio because I was monopolising it. So my mum bought me a big valve radio from local church bazaar, 5 shillings, 25 pence now. But I had to go up to the church and bring it down. And of course, I could not only listen to the Pirates, when most of those went, Radio Caroline was left, I could listen to Radio Caroline, but it also had shortwaves. So I started playing around on shortwaves and hearing all these strange sounds and stations from all over the world on my bit of wire that I ran down the garden. And one day I heard these people talking. That's not a broadcast station, they're just talking. And I heard one of them say, just waving to the lady across the road. And I thought, what is this? And of course it turned out to be 40 metres AM, which was, that was the thing in those days, back in the mid-60s. So that got me hooked, and I wanted to be one of these people. And as I learned more and more about it, the radio just became like magical. I just wanted to be part of it. The Pirates had given me an interest in the broadcasting side, and of course I had the amateur radio side. So I was able to pursue the amateur radio side of it. The broadcasting took a bit longer because there were only the Pirates. And then BBC Local Radio came along, but there wasn't anything near me. And I was only 15 or 16 or whatever at the time. So, but that period between me becoming interested and actually getting the licence, which was in 1971, allowed me to serve an apprenticeship, if you like. So I listened and I absorbed and I learned a lot from, learned a lot about operating procedure, how to conduct a QSO on air. It's unfortunate that way in isn't there now. I don't think people spend enough time actually absorbing.
Well, it's funny because Lord Hull earlier was talking about that when Jonathan was making that contact with Belfast. What did all that mean? And obviously you've learnt that not by being on the air but by listening and, like you say, that apprenticeship. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and I spent quite a lot of time learning the Morse. So by the time, I took the RAE in December 1970, and the results came out in the January. But by then there was a postal strike. The Royal Mail was on strike. And they were on strike for about 3 months. So I couldn't apply for the licence. And I wasn't interested in getting a G8 because I'd never been on VHF. I wanted to go on HF, so that meant the Morse. So we used that period. I could already read Morse, but by the end of that period I could read it up into the 20s. So I went for my Morse test at Humber Radio at Trusthorpe on the East Coast. I was well ready. And the chap said to me, just have a practice. I'm going to practice. And listening and transmitting. And he said, that's all right, you passed. So, I used the time wisely.
Fantastic story there, Jim. So, obviously today is a great day. We've got this new facility at Broadcasting House. What does this mean to the club here? What does it mean to you guys here at BBC, having this facility in the building and obviously having this prestigious call sign?
Well, it's a great resource, obviously, for us. As I don't live in London, I live in the Midlands, so I have to leave all my lovely radio equipment in the Midlands. So now in breaks, or if I'm down here with nothing to do for a day, because my shift is still a day away, I can come up here and have a play. But the beautiful thing about having a call sign and coming from the BBC is when you go on air, people are really pleased to work the BBC. They love the fact that we're in the middle of... There's not much else in the middle of London, amateur radio-wise, to be honest. I think GB2RN is about the closest down by Tower Bridge there. So there's not much amateur radio coming out of the centre.
So you put a call out and suddenly everyone wants to talk to you?
Yeah. Well, when the conditions are okay. Yeah. I mean, they're a bit rough at the minute, aren't they?
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a dip at the moment, but hopefully things will start to improve shortly. But Jim, that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for your story, and I wish you the best of luck here at the BBC.
Well, thanks to ICQ for coming down.
No, it's been great fun. Thank you.